Grants and Researchers is a card game for 3 to 5 players. Players assume the roles of researchers, managing and competing for research grants while increasing their academic reputation. The game consists of 2 decks of cards and several sets of colored reputation chips. Each player receives a set of reputation chips. During the course of the game, you will earn reputation chips by completing and scoring grants. The first player to have 20 reputation chips in play is the winner. The player deck contains research cards. There are 4 types: arts research, humanities research, science research, and wild cards. Research cards are kept in a player's hand and used to pay the research requirements of a player's active grants. Arts, humanities, and science cards have an additional property. They can be ethical or they can be unethical. Unethical cards represent sloppy research practices and cutting corners. If you play one and are later audited, you will suffer setbacks.
Unethical and unethical.
I
You
lose
can't do
chips.
that.
Yep,
Yeah.
you lose a chip.
Wild cards can be played as any research type. Additionally, they each have a special effect that is described on the card. The World deck contains grant and event cards. During play, a few of these cards will be revealed at a time, representing grant opportunities available for bidding and events currently affecting the game. Grant cards contain a few properties. These icons show how many of each research type is required to complete the grant's requirements. The fund value shows how many extra research cards the grant will supply you with. The draws value shows how fast you will get access to the extra fund cards. The rep value shows how many extra reputation chips you will earn when the grant has been successfully completed and scored. Event cards introduce either an ongoing or immediate effect into play. Each event card will describe its effects. Grants and Researchers is played in a series of turns. Each turn there is an active player who completes a series of actions. Then play passes to the adjacent player on that player's left, who completes the same series of actions on their turn. This process is repeated until one player is the winner. Let's briefly review the actions each player may take on their turn. These actions are divided into phases, which must be taken in order. Phase 1. Score grants. If the active player has any completed grants in review, turn sideways, score them. The cards are discarded and the player earns new reputation chips equal to the rep value on the grant in question. Additionally, if other players' chip colors were placed on the grant that is scored, those players each earn 1 additional reputation chip as a collaboration bonus. Phase 2. Draw research cards. The active player must draw 1 card from the player deck, which goes into that player's hand. Additionally, if the player has any grants with existing fund cards, that player draws a number of cards from the fund equal to the draw's amount on that grant. Phase 3. Manage grants. This phase is subdivided into 3 different actions which can be taken in any order, as many times as the player desires. The current player may play research cards from their hand onto any of their active grants. The type must match the icons shown on the grant card, or be a wild card. The played cards are slid secretly underneath the grant so that other players cannot see if the cards are ethical or unethical. At least 1 card must be played to all of a player's active grants every turn. If this requirement is not made, the player permanently discards 1 of the reputation chips on that grant. If there are not any chips on the grant and all its played cards are discarded permanently. If all the requirements of the grant are met, the cards are turned sideways to indicate that the grant is now in review and vulnerable to auditing from other players until it is scored. The current player may propose a trade of research cards with another player. The ethical or unethical status of a card may not be mentioned in the trade proposals. Whenever a trade is made, the two players involved in the trade must select a reputation chip from their active grants, or reserve, and swap it with the other player. There is no gain or loss of reputation in this case, but the chip colors represent a collaborative association with the trading players. The active player may propose an audit of any other player's grants currently in review. The amount of reputation which must be staked on an audit is equal to the rep value of the grant to be audited, or the number of reputation chips on that same grant, whichever is lower. The auditing player may ask for assistance from other players at the table to gain additional reputation chips for the audit. Once the audit is made, the audited player must reveal all of the research cards played to the audited grant. If all of the cards are ethical, the audited player immediately scores their grant as per the rules in Phase 1. The auditing players each permanently lose one of the reputation chips used for the audit. If any of the cards are unethical, the auditing players take back the reputation chips with no loss. The audited player discards all unethical cards played to the grant and loses the associated reputation chips equal to the number of unethical cards. The grant is removed from review and placed back into active status. If the audited player does not have enough reputation chips on the grant to pay the penalty, the grant and all of its cards are lost permanently. Additionally, each other player loses a single chip of their choice from their active grants or reserve if any chips of their color were associated with audited unethical research. Phase 4. Bid for new grants. The active player may bid any unused reputation chips in reserve on any of the currently available grants from the World Deck queue. The chips are put forward, and the player to the active player's left has a chance to raise the current bid. Every player gets a chance to raise the bid or pass. Once everyone has passed, the highest bidder receives the grant and puts it in play. The reputation chips used for bidding stay with the grant until it is completed and scored. The active player may open as many bids as they wish. If a purchased grant contains a fund value greater than 0, a number of research cards equal to that value are drawn from the player deck and placed face down and above the active grant in that player's playing area. Phase 5. End of turn. At the end of a player's turn, the World Deck cards are slid down one slot. The card occupying the last slot, if any, is discarded, and a new card is drawn from the World Deck to occupy the first slot. Any instant event effects are resolved immediately, and a new card is drawn afterwards. The first player to have 20 reputation chips in play wins the game. If no one has 20 chips in play, the game continues with the player to the left at Phase 1.